All right, we're heading into a couple of weeks off, but maybe we can learn something anyway. It's episode 27.
Substitute Teachers Lounge.
Well, I'll have to admit I'm a little melancholy today. I'm looking forward to a 2-week break. So it's about 2.5 weeks here. We don't go back until January 7th as a substitute teacher. So I get a little time off, but I'll miss the kids. You know, I'm a long-term sub right now. I have found that that's going to extend into the first 2 weeks of January. So I'm going to miss the kids over that time period. Don't mind the break off either. I wanted to let you know that the 2 episodes heading into the holidays will be a little bit abbreviated. I'll make them short. You know, we're all so busy right now that I'm going to take, some shorter time getting the podcast ready. And if I was being honest with myself, I'm guessing with 2 weeks off, you probably don't have a whole lot of time to listen to podcasts either. So we'll make it a shorter one this week and next week heading into the holidays and see if we can still learn something. You know, you always have crazy weeks the last week before Christmas, I think. You're trying to figure out what to do. I work closely with the regular teacher. I'm glad, again, like I mentioned last week, that she's a Kahoot fan. We ended our week Friday with a Kahoot competition. They always enjoy the ones I design myself. And if you're just getting into Kahoot, I guarantee you guys it's only going to take you 30 minutes to design a 10-question Kahoot game, and they really enjoy that. And then I found a nice Christmas one on Kahoot itself. As long as somebody creates a Kahoot game and leaves it public, then anybody can find it. And then the ones that are more personal, like the ones I created for them, I ask them things about myself that I knew nobody else would really care about. But you can make those private. So those are a couple of options to you while you're doing Kahoot. But we did that on Friday. Let me tell you what we did Wednesday and Thursday. We were going to show a movie, discussed it with the teacher. We didn't want to just, show something like Elf, as much as I like that movie. I think one class showed that on Friday. We were trying to think of something that would be fairly entertaining, that the kids had probably not seen before, and we just and kind of historical in nature because this was a social studies class. And we decided to show for a couple of days. It's a movie called The Homecoming. It was actually the very first episode of The Waltons. It was a 2-hour movie intro. I think at that time that they weren't sure they were even going to make it into a series. They wanted to see how it went. So we're obviously talking about the 70s, but we're also talking about a movie that's based on Christmas during the Depression era and how hard it was to come up with money back then. And they were waiting for their father to get home, and he was stranded in a snowstorm. So, it's not one of those movies. I'm going to guess that none of those kids are going to be saying to me, hey, let's watch it over and over and over. But several of them did say they were familiar with the movie. They liked it. There was some comical moments. Obviously, there's 6 kids in that family. They paid much more attention to the kids. Some of my students were actually working on projects while the movie was going on. I thought it was funny when the scenes involving 2 adults talking, they would look down and start working on the project, but as soon as the kids came up, they would stop and start watching it a little bit. So I think it went over well, and they learned some things about the history of the country, and I thought that went real well. One of the incentives I always use is I usually ask a trivia question when I want them to kind of watch a movie like this. We did that on Friday. I'm usually a chocolate guy, so we give chocolate away, and I wanted to make sure they were paying attention. So I ask a question, and the winner got a prize. I also usually give away some kind of small chocolate prizes when they win a Kahoot. So that keeps them motivated. It's still amazing to me anytime you add a level of competition, whether you do it electronically or otherwise, it really goes over well. So I like to ask trivia questions. They know that I'm going to ask a trivia question of some type most every Friday. They did that and they won prizes for that. We used a WebQuest feature on Google for what they were studying this week. Usually it's kind of you've got scavenger hunt type ideas, and you've got normally they look up a link and everything they need there is there, and they answer the questions. I know we were one of the ones that we were using before. There was hieroglyphics, and they had made that into a word search type thing. So lots of good ideas. That's what we did this week as well. We did have a day of good note taking so that they would be prepared and from their textbook. So it was a good week. We learned a lot of things together. I learned more about them. I'm trying my best to get to know all their names. It's funny, as I talk to them, sometimes if I catch some of them talking, I'll ask them to tell the rest of the class what I just said. And, to be honest, more times than not, they actually amaze me. They do, in fact, repeat back exactly what I just said. So I guess I have to give them points for multitasking. But we had a good week. One of the things I noticed, I think I've shared with you on here before, that I remembered knowing that my daughter was starting to grow up. She's in her 30s now, but I realized she was starting to grow up when I could tell she ended up this time of year taking more joy out of seeing others opening the gifts that she had given them than the one she was opening herself. I picked that up a lot from the kids this week. These were sixth graders, and I could tell some of the gifts they brought to share with others. They took more joy really in giving those gifts away than they did their own gifts that they received. They gave me some gifts. I always asked to make sure it wasn't for the regular teacher, but they had regular teacher gifts too. So I thought that was very special when they shared stuff like that, and they actually took joy in more joy in giving than they did receiving. So I thought that was great. One other thing that happened special for me this week, a couple of gentlemen came into a class one day and they came up to me and said, "Mr. Collins, we're sorry if we've ever given you a hard time in this class and talking too much, and we just want to say we're sorry and we want to move on from here." And I said, "Well, isn't that special?" I found out that they really just did that on their own. Nobody had told them to do that. I guess they had just been sitting around talking. They're really good kids. They make good grades. Sometimes they're just a little bit talkative, similar to probably what I was in the sixth grade, so I can't fault them for that. But sometimes, you do have to settle them down. I actually ended up having a day off this week, so they had a substitute for a substitute, and they did pretty well. It was actually the day they were watching the second half of that Walton's movie that I was talking about, so it went fine, and we all had a good week together. I hope that they're all having a good holiday break. I hope that you guys have a good holiday break. One other thing that I got to do this week, I got to referee a volleyball match with some students that I hadn't seen in a while because of the long-term job. They were at another school, so it was good to see them. They had a good game. I was happy to see that, as I am any of the schools I teach. I like them to do well. I have to stay impartial, but I do like to see them do well. A lot of times I'll have teams that I've taught both sides of the net, so that's always interesting, but I always wish the best for them and like when they have success. So that's basically been my week. A little bit of note-taking, a movie, having a fun day, and playing Kahoot. I will tell you that I've talked before about the YouTube channel that I found called Data is Beautiful. They had a new one this week to celebrate the opening of the new Star Wars movie. It was the top science fiction movies of all time. So basically it started back in the 1960s. And progressed all the way to the current time. So they always like to watch those and the way it's presented. We also did one on Christmas, one on video games. So after a couple of Kahoots, that's how we spent the rest of the period. And we had a good week. That's some ideas for you if you want to do that in the future. I know the Walton's suggestion is kind of past time now. So you're into your break now. You might forget this. Something to keep in mind for the future. That's a really good educational movie, whether it's Christmas time or not. So I hope you give that some thought. I did, in fact, go see the new Star Wars movie. It's kind of a milestone for me because, to be honest, when I saw the first one back in 1977, I wasn't crazy about it, and I've gotten hooked on it here lately. I've watched all the other movies on cable channels, and I've become interested enough that I'm also watching The Mandalorian now. I think that's as good as the movies. And I went to the new movie with my son. We enjoyed it. I thought it was great. but it was basically 42 years since I had been in a theater watching a Star Wars movie. So that's always interesting. So hope you had a good week this past week. I'll see you next week. Probably we'll do something to kind of reminisce, as we all do for New Year's Eve type episodes. We'll talk about things we can do to improve ourselves. But until then, this has been episode 27 of Substitute Teachers Lounge. Music provided by Ben Sound.